So Nadine, you've been with the bank for 15 years.
Yes.
How has that journey evolved in terms of being at the company over that time, and how has that creative services journey evolved as well?
Yeah. Let me take over speaking because I want to give you a minute
Of course.
to breathe. Yeah. So it's been a journey of growth, both for the organization and for myself and the creative services team. And when I say growth, I mean both in size, but also in just our just transformation digitally and where we've had to go in order to service our clients, and for my team, service our internal clients. I remember, I was happy you asked the question because it made me reflect on how far we've come as an organization, but specifically from the area that I'm responsible for. I remember when I started, I was in the IS department of all places in the web development team, and we didn't have a corporate communications team at the time. Our marketing team was much smaller than it is today. And we had really what I would summarize as a logo versus an actual visual identity and a brand. And so it took some time for the organization to appreciate and to evolve into really, understanding the value of the brand and that it is much more than a couple of corporate colors and a logo. But at the time it was just myself. I was the single designer amongst the organization. Correction, there were three of us, but we were dispersed in various areas across the organization. We didn't even know one another, so it was sort of sad, really, that we didn't have a relationship or a partnership to lean into. And we were servicing the organization in very different ways. I remember Lisa, who's now still on the team with myself, she was supporting the trust services area. Davina, she was in the marketing area as a production assistant because we were and are still supported by a creative agency, so we are supplemented in this hybrid fashion between our in-house team and our creative agency. And then there was myself. So like I said, I started in IAS as a web designer, and then I moved once I was there for a few years. I left on mat leave, and when I came back, a corporate communications team had just shaped. And so it was a really great opportunity, and I had built a reputation and some relationships in the organization that someone actually approached me to say, we'd really love for your skill set to be on as part of the corporate communications team. And so that was a really natural progression for me. So I moved into that role, and then it wasn't long that I really hungered for some teammates and some leadership opportunity. And as the organization was also growing, the demand was there. And so it wasn't, I had a leader that really believed in the opportunity and myself. And so at that point, we centralized all three of us. And we're still together today, those same three of us. So it's a really great story. But we've expanded now to, there's 8 of us servicing the organization. And we are a creative services team that is recognized by the organization for the business function that we are. And so yeah, we've come a very long way, both as a creative team, as an organization, and with our brand specifically. We rebranded in 2019. I'll backtrack. In 2014 was when we actually first decided, we need a comprehensive guide that speaks to how we show up, who we are, what the tone of our brand is, what those visual elements are that make up who we are and how we show up in the market. And so that was when we first had our first ever graphic standards, which when I joined the organization, I felt lost. Like, how do we not have a graphic standards? We're all kind of fumbling inconsistently. And there wasn't even a shared drive that had some semblance of organization in terms of our assets. So we have come a tremendous way today, and as of May 2nd, having launched our first digital asset management platform.
Yeah, terrific. And I think, we call this presentation from 0 to 1 is it is a very tough road to go from absolutely nothing to something. However, it's actually probably an easier leap to go from 5 to 10 or from 7 to 10 as well. And as an organization, you did a pretty exhaustive search to understand how technology could help your organization and the way that you work. But it's not about just alleviating that pressure. It is about ensuring that you've got a way to define an insight into the way assets are working, to define an insight into the way that the market is going to ensure that your brand is always protected, it's used correctly. You've got a whole range of partners that you work with as well to ensure that as well. So I'm keen to kind of delve a little bit deeper and understand a little bit more. Then you talked about the way that you previously worked. What type of tools had you been using to kind of continue down that path to becoming more efficient?
The first tool, so once we centralized as a team, it was primitive. I mean, we were reusing, and still there's work to be done. I mean, we were reusing very isolated tools and basic tools like email, our shared drive. Then we eventually onboarded the organization onboarded a platform called ShareFile, and so now we could at least send larger files within and out and externally to different partners. And then as my team grew, the first thing that I wanted to formalize was an intake process, and that was when we had onboarded a platform called FunctionFox. And that needs to be revisited, and it's part of, probably what I'll share later in terms of where we're going with IntelligenceBank and the DAM. But that was one of the first things that needed to be handled, was how do we cut down on some of the noise in our day-to-day operations. And so it was important that as we started adding people to the team, that we weren't just manning this inbox in a haphazard way, that we actually, we built out not only could we intake from that, and get notifications directly to the designer that was assigned to the job, but then we were also able to pull reporting as to where are we servicing the organization mostly. That also helped me build business cases for adding more people, because then I had actual numbers to say, well, here's how much time we're spending on this or for this business, this area of the business. So that was where we had gotten to, and then it became a big flag for me that we need something now to hold all of our assets. And there were ways that, I have this very, as a designer at heart, I have this very visceral reaction to how rapid we are moving in marketing. And as much as I wanted to be able to preach to about, hey, this is not how creatives work. We can't just be scattered across all of these different things and in this very reactive mode constantly. But naturally that's going to fall on deaf ears. I mean, too bad, really, is the way it is. Business has to run. We have clients. We have to progress as a business, grow as a business, earn revenue. We need to be able to compete with our competitors. And so it just needs to run at this pace, and it's not going to change. The volume of work and the pace at which it's coming isn't going to change. And so naturally now, I had to take a long, hard look at and let go of, how I philosophically felt about how we should be running a creative shop, and really about how can we best serve the business and at the same time reduce the stress and chaos for ourselves. And so naturally that my mind turns to technology, and where's the opportunity, what are the things we can stop doing, and turning to technology to help us create efficiencies.
And it's not just getting the most out of the technology, you've got to bring the people into that technology as well, correct?
Absolutely. There's human behavior behind all of it, and changing some of those practices as well, yeah.
Okay. So I'm keen to kind of go a little bit more into understanding a little bit more about the kind of environment that you're in, because you're in a highly regulated environment, as we've discussed in the past. What is the impact on not just creative services, but obviously the marketing teams as well, on the regulations and the compliance processes that are required when you're putting content out into the wide world? What's the impact for you and your team, and potentially the broader teams as well?
Yeah, I kind of wish I had our regulatory compliance team here. They would give you a much better answer. But I'd say that for my team, typically the marketing team handles a lot of, in terms of the content and reviewing it from a regulatory compliance standpoint, that almost gets done before it gets to my team. Where we have to be very mindful of that as a creative team is, and this became very evident when we were onboarding the DAM, was the biggest uplift an advantage we were going to take out of the DAM was assigning metadata to our assets. It wasn't just organizing them and having transparency to offer the rest of the organization. It was really that we could assign metadata and information to these files that now we can search them more effectively. We can learn more about, I'll give you an example. We do our own client photography, and with that, they come model releases and privacy information, that to identify the individual. And currently that being shared on a shared drive and within a team of 8, we don't have the same risk or the same concern about how that information is being handled. But now you put that into a cloud service that's not even on-prem, and it's now going to be an enterprise-wide solution in which everyone across the organization has access to view and read this information in terms of the employees or the client's name, where there's no banking information, but still anything that can identify them is a concern for the organization. And in terms of how are we collecting that, who are we sharing that with, how are we using it? And so that became a concern that we had to deal with when we were going, because if I couldn't input it,
Sure.
it held back the potential of what the platform offered us. And so it dealt with it. I leaned into the subject matter experts in those situations, but I was responsible for engaging them to ensure that what we were handling and how we were handling it was within our regulatory requirements.
Sure, and I think on the other side of, I guess, more about brand compliance, is that something that took an element in your kind of decision making about what type of platform we're going to go through, is ensuring that the brand is managed correctly across the organization? Is that something that you took into your thinking?
Yeah, that was definitely one of probably 3 or 4 main critical pieces of criteria when we were evaluating. Was one, that it could offer us a brand hub where we can place our graphic standards from an educational standpoint, but also to redirect people when, say, IS is bringing on their own new platform and need to skin it. How are we telling them how to, be compliant with the brand and have it show up consistently? We now had the resource to share what was available for them now in an easy way. I would say it allows us as well to have a single source of truth, right? And that's the biggest thing, is that now we have all of our logos, all of our approved icons and imagery, that's all brand approved content, that now nobody's sourcing something from wherever they took it off the internet, or wherever a colleague had shared a logo and saved it, 6 years ago before the rebrand, and it's not the new version. So now we have a master file and repository that everyone has access to, and so that really helps with consistency.
Yeah, of course. And I think you've been on that journey now, and you only recently went live with the platform. I'm keen to understand, given all the requirements that you had, how's that implementation journey been for you? How has, and understanding that as an organization, and particularly as a creative services team, you're extremely busy. So your day job is to actually look after the wider bank and the wider banking group with great content. But you've also got to implement systems. Tell us a little bit more about that journey for you. What were some of the challenges? What went well? What didn't go well? And how did that impact you and your team?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So I will say it took us 9 months, which I thought we could do it a lot sooner. And I don't know if you remember some of our early meetings. One of the questions we came in with was, how fast can we do this? And I remember the response to us was, well, depends on how fast you want to go, and you can go. And I know that I know where that was leading very well, because we have an accountability as well to be prepared for the work that was going to have to get done to actually get the platform up and running, right? We now held all the assets that had to be audited and migrated and tagged with all the metadata. So in reality, it took 9 months. Now, I wouldn't say that went wrong, but it was a great learning experience for me to sort of say, hey, to do it right, it takes some time. And one of the things that came to us very quickly, the biggest point of work, the greatest volume of work for us came when we went to audit the content and migrate it over. It wasn't so much setting up the workflows and the folders and all of that, although that took a very unique amount of cognitive effort to make sure that we were shaping that the right way. And it was new territory for us, so it made us a little bit hesitant. Are we doing this the right way? Are we putting the right permissions around these things? But when we got to actually having to sit and look in our shared drives, and we had really good housekeeping practices, so we started in a good place. But we had to look at everything, and having come out of a pandemic too, with 2 years of a deficit, we were able to cut out a large degree and say, these are no longer relevant. Then we had to look at what we still had and create some sort of measure of how long is this going to take us without having any experience to base that on. And the team of 8 that I have, we are flat out. I mean, we're constantly having to reprioritize and pivot. And so I came to, I went in naively thinking, okay, these 4 individuals will help me with this task of getting all of this uploaded. They have the greatest knowledge of the assets and have been on the team the longest. And so, but hoping for the opportunity that they'd have the space to do that outside of their day-to-day was naive, and I should have known better. And so it got to the point where I kept saying to Audrey, who was our implementation manager from IntelligenceBank, I said, I keep thinking next week's the week we're going to get to this, and it's just not happening. So I had to go to my boss, Nick, and just express to him, hey, I have to shut the lights off for these 4 individuals, and here's how long I think it's going to take. And so let's just decide to outsource any critical work that comes our way. We'll outsource it to our agency so that these individuals can help me get this up and running, or else it's just not going to happen. Because everything else that comes that's going to meet a business need that day always is taking priority over transforming your internal operations, right? Even though there's long-term gain of that, the short term is it's very hard to make that a priority over everything else that's coming at you. So yeah, and I was very happy. I made the decision early on that we were going to use our own team for that work and not outsource that work. I'd rather outsource other work to our agency and not hire other consultants or what have you to do that work. We knew our assets best, and we also knew what metadata we had to add to them.
I was about to say, you own your assets, you've been
Yeah.
kind of the purveyors of those assets for a long period of time. If you did potentially outsource that, would you expect it would have taken longer and potentially more issues if you did outsource that piece of work?
Yeah, well, now I still need to use my team to train and direct somebody. I just envisioned a ton of cyclical questions, and perhaps even if we left them to their own, expertise and gave them some direction early on and then left them to do the job, I really worried that then we'd be left with a platform that wasn't shaped quite how we would have wanted it or to the level of detail that we wanted it and we expected it to be. And so, although it was advised earlier that perhaps we just budget for, a couple of extra hands in a temporary way to do this job specifically, I was like, no, we need the team to do this. They know the assets and the culture, the business, and all of those things way better than anyone that I can't download all of that to somebody.
Tell me, we've been hearing in the previous conversation more about hybrid work and the hybrid environment, and we know that CWB themselves are a big supporter of supporting people in hybrid environments. You've got a hybrid work policy. How has the hybrid environment, and effectively looking at SaaS solutions, how does that help, given that there are so many people working from home? Could you achieve the same results over a VPN, for example, and the like? Has that been kind of one of the impetus to kind of get this up and running as quickly as possible?
I'd like to say it was. In a way, it wasn't, because I really wanted to just be able to get the creative team working on the tasks that had long-term value and not helping people source and resize logos and images. That was really my biggest catalyst for it. But in the end, that turned out to be a really pleasant surprise and a great fit for where we are now. My team in particular, we work predominantly from home. We even had flexible work arrangements prior to the pandemic. And so it's always been a challenge for us to get the same performance from home off of our machines and going through the VPN and through the firewalls than when we're in the office, right? And having that proximity to the servers and things like that. So having now all of our assets accessible and stored. So we were using ShareFile. So it was laborious, and I could feel the pain that the team was having to go through to now even just take files from our shared drive, put it on ShareFile, so that now they could because it's a web-based platform as well, now we could take it from home and download it, because trying to get it saving and working off the server was just a nightmare.
Yeah, and yeah. I can imagine also, given the regulatory environment you're in, you have to be on the VPN.
That's right.
You can't just share files. You can't log into other systems from home and expect that everything's just going to work. Did that impact? We're talking about like even file speed, right? The idea of you've got a 2 or 3 gigabyte file, it might be a video, trying to download that. Was that taking forever over a VPN?
Forever.
Yeah.
I've had many conversations, and in fact, it was interesting and ironic because as I was trying to work on implementing DAM, I was also simultaneously having conversations with IS to say, how do I improve the performance of the tools that my team has in terms of just even their desktops, like in their Adobe Creative Suite and the large files. And it's just been an ongoing saga for us because they can't remove the firewalls. They can't put us on an isolated server. So it's been a really big challenge, in which now the DAM has solved a significant amount of that for us.
Of course. A couple more questions I'd love to ask. One of them is, I think we just mentioned you've recently gone live. How has the adoption been? What's the reaction been, not just to the creative services team, potentially the wider marketing team as well? It's a new way of working, obviously. How's, what sense have you got from the office floor, the virtual office floor? What sense have you got in terms of feedback thus far?
We've received a lot of really great unsolicited comments about just having the freedom to go in and not have to put a formal request into creative services for such small remedial tasks, right? So that they have the power to fulfill these things themselves. And so it's very much a win-win, and people are very much appreciating even having the transparency to see what assets we have, let alone if they ever have the need to download them, but just knowing, oh, okay, I didn't even know that the organization had this set of icons, and I didn't know that we had shot all these clients, and what industries they were all from, and what kind of employee events we've covered. And it's just, the transparency that alone is immeasurable, just having the organization and the accessibility that the organization can have. But it's had, the biggest quick wins are for my team, that we are no longer fulfilling those remedial tasks, and now the team has more time to focus on the long-term value add things that are best, that make use of their skill sets more than just fulfilling these types of tasks. And then it helps the organization. Investor relations in particular comes to us often. They're preparing a deck for this or that, or a corporate presentation, and they're authoring their own deck, but they have to come to us for different assets. And so we're basically coming in and out of their deck with them in this very interruptive, inefficient way. They're saying, okay, now I'm working on this page and this is the kind of thing I'm looking for. Do you have something like this? Or we had this last year, did you refresh it, and is there anything new? Now for him to have just access to everything we have access to and browse it the way we do it changes.
So it's a self-service mentality now. Is that individuals within the bank, no matter what business unit you work in, you've got an opportunity to go and self-service, or at least fill in a very quick form and maybe get the answers yourself?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's all right there.
Yeah. Excellent. The final question that I have for you is, what's next? We know that your dam's up and running. You've got a brand guidelines, and I guess the next step is kind of ensuring that those brand elements are starting to work through. What are some of the other elements that you kind of want to work through as you see your journey with our platform, but just in general across the organization? Yeah.
Well, some of the other critical things that we were looking for out of the DAM was, like I said earlier, the ability to put up and digitize our graphic standards. But we also wanted it to be able to plug into a couple of platforms that are enterprise-wide for us. One, Adobe, specific to my team, creates a really big efficiency that we can have our working files within the DAM and pull in even finished assets into our work within Adobe. It creates a really big efficiency for us. So having that Adobe plugin is next on our list, as well as having the Sitecore plugin. And so all of our external websites are on that content management platform for Sitecore, and having that, like even just being able to, we're really looking forward not only to be able to not have to upload, it's just duplicate effort to now upload their assets are somewhere on a shared drive. Now you're also uploading to this one platform. They're in all these different places, which is a waste of storage, and also just it's time consuming to be having them. And then if one changes, well, now you don't even know where all the different sources are to change, right? And you have to think through that cognitively. It's a lot of work. So with the Sitecore plugin, the biggest advantage, in my opinion, is that we get to the point of actually linking directly to the asset. And so the asset's on DAM, Sitecore's linking to the asset. We can also then track where it is, but also link directly to it and not have to have copies of it. And from a retention standpoint, like you know where the assets are, where they need to be updated. You update the single source,
of course,
and it's perfect.
And we discussed the other day, you're talking about things kind of even further into the future, things such as proofing and annotations on assets, and then getting the approvals on those assets, because as we know, you will at some point, a regulator may say, hey, where was this approved, what changes were made, etc. Is that something that you're considering going forward?
Yeah, in fact, I have a meeting with Susie next week to talk about the marketing operations piece, because what's come up recently, we had, as I mentioned earlier, Function Fox, and that's sort of our productivity platform and our intake process. But I'd like to centralize all that wherever I can, so that the team and the organization's only supporting and managing one relationship, one platform, and it just creates efficiencies for us. So the marketing operations piece, I do hope to move that. We don't have a proofing tool, so that's a big gain there. And then the productivity and intake process we want to move over as well. And so I was recently asked, I've been asked over the past year or so from other areas in the organization, I hear you have this platform called FunctionFox, and that's how you intake, requests. Can you tell me a bit more about it? I think that my team might be able to leverage that as well. In fact, I got that request from Caitlin, who's sitting at the table, just last week. And I said, okay, well, hold tight, because I do want to get to a point of investigating further and learning more about what IntelligenceBank has to offer through their marketing operations feature. And so, because it is my intent, I'd like to move the team there. And so I don't want to have other parts of the organization moving on to a platform that I have intentions of letting go of. And it's not to say anything bad about FunctionFox. It's served our purposes for a while now, but being able to have everything all in one shop, so to speak, is ideal for us.
Yeah. I think this concept of having a single platform is becoming more and more common, and that actually occurs. Like, for example, sales teams have CRM platforms. They don't have multiple platforms that they need to work in. General ledger is for accounting, etc. And the idea is having one platform that you can actually do your workflows and your creative processes in as well. Today's creative studio marketing teams are under so much pressure to deliver content quickly. The intent is that even though it might take some time, I think you talked about the 9 months. I think that was 9 months from the first point that we had a conversation with you guys to the point that we solved. So in terms of the implementation period of time, when we kicked off implementation to that kind of go live, was that a lot shorter? Was it a 4 to 5 month period, or?
Yeah, you're probably right. It probably was closer to November, December when we truly started to dig into the implementation portion.
Right.
Yeah.
It's an important one to consider because it does take time.
It does.
And you do have to kind of think about what resources you're going to need.
Yeah, well, and I was very militant about the metadata and securing that and safeguarding that and being extremely diligent about how clear and effective and detailed the metadata is. Because, another quick win that we had was now having that personal information for a client or an RM that, so when we go into a client shoot, there's the client, there might be other team members of theirs in the shoot, and then there's also our relationship manager from the banking center. And so we have model releases captured at the time of the shoot, but these are in flat PDFs and they're living in our shared drive somewhere. And there's a disconnect now between the file and that information that is really important to us for a number of reasons. One, if we have to add a caption within a publication of who's in the photo, well, now we're searching for this PDF of this model release. And then I'm also looking at the names and I'm going, okay, but who's who in this? And what if the client or even a photo of an employee they're no longer with us? Now, how do we pull that when we can't search them?
Of course.
So that was a huge win in which we just recently engaged HR to say, hey, as part of, so for employees specifically, not so much clients, but for employees, when an employee leaves the bank, it is our preference to pull images of that employee that's no longer with us. Even for an employee who's left on good terms, we just want to retire those assets and keep the people that are showing up in our material relevant. And so that was impossible before. So now the operations team sends us through, because we have an HRIS, they send us those termination notifications, whether somebody's retired or what have you. And then we simply go and do a search for that person's name and pull all those assets that quick. And we had no ability to do that before.
Yeah.
It's just sitting there. We're hoping nobody uses them. So I could go on the list of the advantages and just the multitude of quick wins that it's given us. But
well, hopefully it continues, that journey continues, and you've got the opportunity to kind of grow and develop with that as well.